Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today we're going to be talking about these two guys and what happened to me and these robots at RoboWars Nationals in Australia last weekend. So, as you can see, these guys are quite beat up, or at least StrangerMan over here is. So StrangerMan we've seen on the channel before, and he is now sporting a lot of new damage, including a completely destroyed head up the top here. And then this robot over here is a different robot that I called Crudity 2. This was the one that was supposed to have the 3D printed gears that I showed off in the last video in it. But that did not quite go as planned, so we'll talk about that in a second. But first, let's talk about StrangerMan. So as you can see here, StrangerMan took quite the beating over that weekend. But before we talk about all of the damage that happened to this guy, I think what I want to do first is talk about the changes that were made to the design before the weekend, and kind of talk about how successful or unsuccessful those changes were, and what we're going to do again in the future. So first and foremost, in the head, because obviously the head is the key feature here that I do want to start talking about, the eyes were changed. So originally the eyes were these guys here, which are just a ring of LEDs, or like a disc of LEDs that came out of a $5 push light from a cheap shop near me. The only problem with that is that the wires here are surface mount soldered to the back, and inside the actual eye those wires were rubbing round against the plastic, and during big hits they would shear off, which meant that when I fought it at Vivid, I had issues at keeping these wires in place. So we dumped those completely, and what I found instead is this little guy in here, which is a little bit hard to see, but it is a super bright single LED on a little like lily pad circuit board. And these things were about $2 for a pair, so I didn't mind actually just gluing them into the eye socket. So as you can see here, this eye socket got completely and totally wrecked, but the light stayed in it, and it would actually power up if I connected those wires across to a battery, because this time around the surface mount soldering points are facing outwards, which means that there's no friction on them, no pressure on them. I also put a bunch of hot glue across the top of them to keep everything in place, which meant that even if I wriggle this all the way around by the wires, there's nothing going to happen to this, and I can still just power that up and ready to go. So this was really good, because it meant that the lights kept on even though I took a lot more damage and took a lot more hits. The only time they ever actually turned off was when a saw went straight through the head and actually ripped the wires out of the connection point that was inside. So that one was a small change, but actually quite an important one, because it meant that those eyes stayed on, and when we talk about the fights, that was actually quite important in and of itself. So the other change, and the bigger change that happened this time round, was last time we had issues with the arm bending. So this here is the weapon arm from last time round. It's made of 3mm steel across the back here, and then also it has a 3mm steel tongue, and this tongue was supposed to be straight up, and it was supposed to get in under robots and flip them over. However, as you can see, that didn't work out so well. It bent all the way up, and if you check out the Vivid battle video, you'll see all of the hits that it took to do this, and it wasn't all that substantial. There was lots of kind of just running into the wall and stuff that bent that up. So obviously this needed a change and an upgrade, so we got rid of that guy and we added in this guy. So this is a piece of 40mm box steel, and it then has, I think, 35mm tubes that have been hammered flat at the ends and welded shut and then ground down to give it a nice little tip at the bottom here, and of course welded to this tube. So this is quite hefty, but a lot sturdier than that one, and even though this arm bar got cut to high heaven by a grinder and slammed by a pickaxe and all sorts of stuff, it is still solid as a rock and ready to go. There's no bending, no nothing in here. So this was a great upgrade, and this worked out really, really well, and meant that the lifting arm didn't bend this time, which meant that I had less stuff that I had to do between fights. But of course, that was a lot of weight, and StrangerMan was already overweight when we took him to Vivid, so there needed to be some changes made to the inside. So we're just going to quickly take the lid off here, if I can get that off. Here we go. And inside there is some of the bits of StrangerMan, but the key stuff that we're actually looking at here is these sidewalls and this base plate. So we'll just move this camera in a little bit, and you can see some of the junk that I've left sitting around in StrangerMan. These are just StrangerMan bits. But this base plate used to be 3mm thick aluminium, which was quite heavy, and it also bent quite heavily in these corners, which I did show off in the last video. So we've replaced that with HDPE, high density polyethylene, which is actually the same stuff that cutting boards are made out of, and it held up really, really well. There is still a little bit of bending down in these corners down here, but they did pretty well, and it's all held up relatively good. So all I need to do now is unbolt this stuff and take a heat gun to it to get that to flatten back out again, and it should be fine. Then on the sidewalls, these sidewalls were once again 3mm aluminium. I'm just going to stand this camera back up a little bit better. There we go. So these sidewalls were 3mm aluminium, once again very, very heavy. They were changed across to 3mm polycarbonate, which is commonly known as bulletproof glass. This stuff is really, really strong, but very flexible, as you can see. So it wobbles all over the place, which did mean that getting the lid on and off kind of got a little bit difficult sometimes. However, it was an interesting upgrade, and it did mean that between the two upgrades, the plastic in the base and the plastics in the sidewalls, I had enough weight to make sure that StrangerMan was underweight, and then also add in that brand new armbar in there. So everything else in here is still the same. So for me, StrangerMan actually did really, really well over the weekend, because especially when I built this robot, he wasn't actually built to be super competitive. I wasn't expecting to win every single fight with StrangerMan, but what I was doing when I tried to build this guy and gave him the head and made him look like an actual robot was to try and put on a show and to be a crowd favorite, essentially. I mean, for some people that they don't really care too much about that. They're in there and they want to win everything that they do, but that's not what this guy was ever about. He was always about putting on that show and doing something a little bit more theatrical, I guess, than anything else. So in that regard, StrangerMan was an amazing success, because for the most of the weekend he was the crowd favorite in most of the fights that he went into. And then on top of that, because these eyes light up and they give this nice green glow because of these transparent PLA lenses, every time he went into the arena and I powered him up and those lights came on, there was this visible, like this audible ooh from the audience, which was just incredible. This guy lived up to everything I wanted him to be. He was supposed to be this kind of showpiece, and that is what he's done, and he's done very, very well. I think going forwards in the future, there's going to have to be a lot of repairs, as you can see, but I'm going to leave the outer casing, this nice big thick piece of aluminium that is the outer casing. I'm going to leave it with all of these scratches and dents and stuff in it, and I'm just going to bend it back into shape so it bolts onto the body a little bit better. But I want to leave these in here because these kind of now give the robot a bit more character. Obviously the head will get a complete reprint because it was just a 3D printed piece of plastic, so I can print another one of those. It's going to take kind of a day and a half to print that and all of the pieces, because all of the mouth and the eye sockets and the ears, which are all broken now, all of those things had to get printed and painted separately. But yeah, we can definitely print another one of those guys and get that ready to go. So like I said, he did pretty well. Of all of the fights, there was one that is kind of highly memorable for me, and that was the fight that I had against Skeletor. So we're just going to quickly go and have a look at the fight with Skeletor, and I'm going to show you guys that, because it was just a great, great fight. So this is the fight that I wanted to show you guys from this weekend. This is StrangerMan, as you can see at the bottom of the screen there, versus Skeletor, who's currently performing some acrobatics up at the top of the screen. So Skeletor, as you can see, has that articulating arm that has quite a lot of power to it. That has a saw blade attached to the end, and a very large saw blade And of course, because that arm has quite a lot of reach, it was the first saw blade that really actually had a chance of getting into Strange Young Man's head, which is quite an issue, as you're about to see. So this fight should get underway pretty soon. But yeah, just a little bit about Skeletor. Skeletor is a robot that I've seen before. I've never actually managed to fight this one before. It's very interesting. It's mostly air armor. There isn't actually any real physical outer layer on that robot, and as you can see there, my first couple of charges I kept the arm up attempting to protect the head, and then all starts going wrong. After that first charge, he knocks out the ear in a spin there, and I'm trying to lift him up, and it's not quite going as well as I'd like. And as you can see, the head is starting to take some damage, but that's fine. That is kind of what it's there for. It's there to look good. Oh, that's yeah, that's not good. That hit is pretty incredible. That's where most of the damage to the head is. But as I said, it's fine. That head is purely a cosmetic item. It's there to look good and to distract him a little bit while I keep bashing his robot around. And also to get a bit of favor from the crowd, I guess, is what the head is for. So yeah, and as you can see, some of these ones where the sword is to the side of the head is actually really scary, because I have a removable link on that side of the robot, on the right hand side of the robot, and yeah, when that sword, like, oh, just near there, that's getting really scary, because that link, if that gets cut, it cuts power to Strange Young Man, and Strange Young Man would lose. There, as you can see, he keeps trying to take on the head with the saw blade. I've got the lifter working relatively well at this point. I've got a small lift out of him there, which is quite nice. Yeah, I think my only problem at this point in time is oh yeah, another hit to the head. That's not great. But yeah, my only problem at this point in time is that I am still not great at using the weapon effectively. I think I actually need to modify my controller a little bit, or change up my controls. And then also the weapon doesn't quite have as much power as I would like it to have. However, it does get a couple of really good lifts in this fight, including this one, which is just awesome. He is actually up completely off the ground there. That is the best lift that I've ever managed to get with Strange Young Man, and it felt so good to have that happen. He was completely off the ground and pinned against the wall, but of course you can only hold pins for a certain amount of time, and I really wanted to kind of keep the fight going and see if I could do it again. And as you can see, that saw blade just all the time is going for the head, and it's done a lot of damage. It did a lot of damage in this fight, so much so that there was barely anything I could do with duct tape. And then as you can see here, his arm is now broken, and its articulator section is now broken, so it's just kind of like snapped off. We're also now caught together, and I didn't really realize this until after the fight. The fight is about to end, but we are caught together, and that means that, yeah, he basically just has pretty much free reign with that saw blade, although he doesn't have a lot of control over where that's going right now, because his articulator is kind of broken. But yeah, so this is pretty much the end of the fight here, and it was such a good fight. Those couple of lifts that I got in with Strange Young Man really helped out, and I enjoyed this all the way through.
So, from the high of Strange Young Man from that weekend, we now move to the low of that weekend, and that is this guy. This is Crudity 2, or at least it's kind of sort of some of the parts of Crudity 2. So this was the robot that was supposed to have the belt drive and the 3D printed gears and stuff in it that I showed off in my last video, and it was also going to have this nice little surprise in here, which is twin ADFs. So these are electric ducted fans. So basically they're electric jet engines, essentially. They've got little brushless motors out the back here, and they run these fans very, very fast, pull lots of air in and throw lots of air back out the back again. And they were supposed to, between the two of these things that are bolted down, they were supposed to give me about 4 kilos of extra pushing power. So the whole idea was to get somebody onto the wedge at the front here, turn these ADFs on, and just slam them into the wall with that 4 kilos of extra push that I would have had behind me. Now, as you can see, this guy's pretty empty. There is not a lot going on in here anymore. That's because this whole robot failed in a number of different ways. So basically, because this was very hastily put together, there was a few bits and pieces that I did that just went wrong. So first and foremost, there were 3D printed gear brackets here, gear boxes on the sides, just in behind the wedge, and they were supposed to hold in the gears and get everything working. However, on the way over, one of them broke, and also the welds up the side in here that hold these things together, which are very nice flat-ish welds, they actually pushed the wall of the gearbox in just a little bit, meaning that I couldn't actually fit the gear into its location. I couldn't jam the gear that needed to go in there, which meant that even if the motor mount hadn't broken, the whole gearbox wouldn't work anyway because that gear didn't fit. And then also taking this thing apart, well, I put it all together and jammed all of the electronics and stuff into it and weighed it and realized that it was 7.5 kilos, which is actually basically half the weight that it was supposed to be. So in a 13 kilo competition, you really, really don't want to be the robot that's in there at 7.5 kilos, especially with the huge spinning weapons that were on display in the category that this would have gone into. So how I managed to be that far underweight, I'm not really sure. I think it's because this front wedge is only 5mm mild steel, and then these sidewalls are actually just the same box section that's in StrangerMan's arm. So they are mostly air, and they are very lightweight. They give a lot of protection, and I do want to use something similar to them in the future, but they are just mostly dead air. I did actually put some 3D printed parts in the back of them so I could bolt a backplate on, but the backplate itself was just more of this HDPE stuff, and it was just cutting board, which meant it was really lightweight and just added to the problems that I was having rather than helping with those in any way. Yeah, so this guy, he failed. He failed in a big way. But that is okay. Engineering, which is what I hope to be doing on this channel, is all about learning from those failures and iterating designs and changing things up and actually having a bit of a different approach to building than I built this guy. This guy was built very quickly. It was built on an idea of jamming these ADFs into a robot, and I thought that I could do that in a month and everything would be fine, and this was the result. It was a disaster. So now we have an entire year before RoboWars Nationals happens again. So what we're going to do is on this channel together we're going to go through and we're going to build this robot right. We're going to do it properly. I'm going to go through and do thrust testing on these ADFs under a bunch of different conditions and see what thrust I can actually get out of them, and also what conditions they need to get the most amount of thrust, because that is going to be important when we go through and actually get these things bolted into a bot. I need to know how much air I need to let in and how much air I need to let out to get the most amount of thrust out of these. Plus also there is some talk online about putting thrust tubes on the back of them, which should increase thrust. I need to work out how beneficial that is to me, because that's going to take up a lot of space inside a robot. Next up, I obviously need to get better at actually cutting and building things, or I need to get the designs done early enough and get sheet steel, laser or plasma cut or something so that these things are actually a lot better and bolt together nicer, I guess. On top of that, I do need to do some more testing with that 3D printed gearbox. In the last video that you saw, we did have the wheels moving, but we had some issues with belts jamming and stuff like that, so I need to actually sit down with my gearboxes and I need to do some more testing on them, see how much weight they can push, how good these wheels are, that type of thing. So basically this whole robot failure has meant that there are lots and lots of videos coming up in the future as we go through together and rebuild this thing from scratch, testing and actually doing everything we're supposed to do along the way. Yeah, so hopefully that will produce a really cool EDF robot for next year's Nationals, and we'll fight that together and see how we go on that one. So yeah, there you go. Like I said, lots of big and exciting things coming up in the channel. This guy I'm not going to work on next week. Next week we're going to be talking about 3D printed ants out of rubber. And by ants, I mean ant weight robots, not actual ants. That would be weird. Although I could actually 3D print an ant out of rubber. Maybe we'll do that as well. But yeah, so next week we're going to be talking about 3D printing combat robots out of rubber and how all of that stuff goes, because I've got some really cool little stuff, little kind of experiments and things to talk to you about. And I think that's going to be helpful to some of you out there who are actually building ant weights and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, so there you go. Like I said, that is this all and over and done with. From failure, we are going to have some success and build some new robots, and yeah, like I said, produce some more videos for this channel. So I hope you guys have enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next video.